I arrived at the wedding venue dressed in an elegant navy blue dress, holding a carefully wrapped gift for my sister. My heart pounded with anticipation, a mix of excitement and nervousness. Today was supposed to be a celebration, a day when family came together. But as I approached the entrance, the receptionist at the check-in desk frowned at her guest list. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but your name isn't here." I laughed lightly, thinking it was some sort of mistake. "You must be mistaken. I'm the bride's sister." The receptionist hesitated. Her eyes darted away, as if she wished to be anywhere else but in this conversation. I'm afraid your name was removed from the list." The world around me seemed to freeze. Removed? My voice came out in a whisper, barely audible over the chatter of arriving guests. The woman nodded, clearly uncomfortable. "Your mother made the request." My stomach dropped. My own mother had deliberately erased me from my sister's wedding. I stood there, gripping the wedding gift tighter in my hands, my breath shallow. The receptionist avoided my gaze, shifting uncomfortably in her seat. "This must be a mistake," I murmured. "I was invited. I got the invitation myself." The woman hesitated, then lowered her voice. "I'm really sorry, but I was given strict instructions not to let you in." I clenched my jaw, forcing back the sting of humiliation. People were beginning to glance in my direction, curious whispers spreading like wildfire. My heart pounded. I could feel the weight of their stares, their silent judgment. I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling as I scrolled through my contacts. I found my mother's number and hit call. It rang. Once. Twice. She answered. "Why are you calling me?" Her voice was cold, detached. "I'm at the entrance," I said, swallowing the lump in my throat. "They won't let me in. They said my name was removed." "Mom, why?" There was a pause, and then a sigh. "Because, Olivia, we thought it would be best if you didn't come." "Best? Best for whom?" "Certainly not for me." "What does that even mean?" I asked, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "You always make a scene," she replied bluntly. "This is your sister's special day. We didn't want any unnecessary drama." The words cut deeper than I expected. I had never done anything to deserve this. Yes, my relationship with my family had been strained in recent years, but this? This was beyond cruel. "I'm her sister," I whispered. "I have every right to be here." "Go home, Olivia," she said. And then the line went dead. I stared at my phone in disbelief. My own mother had just shut me out. Humiliated, hurt, and burning with anger, I turned on my heel and walked away from the venue. But as I reached my car, I made a silent vow. This wasn't over. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The weight of my mother's words settled heavily in my chest. "Go home, Olivia." But where was home, really? Certainly not with them. Not anymore. My heart pounded with a mix of anger and pain as I pulled out my phone again. If my mother wouldn't give me answers, maybe someone else would. I hesitated before scrolling through my contacts and pressing a familiar name, Emma, my cousin. She had always been the only one in my family who didn't treat me like an outsider. It rang twice before she answered. "Liv?" Her voice was soft, hesitant. "What's wrong?" "I was just turned away from my own sister's wedding," I said, my voice shaking. "Do you know why?" There was a long pause on the other end. "Emma," I pressed. "Tell me the truth." A deep sigh came through the phone. "Liv, I don't know how to say this, but it was never meant for you to come." "What?" My stomach twisted. "I got an invitation." "I know," she said, "because I sent it." Her words hit me like a slap. "What do you mean you sent it?" My voice was barely above a whisper. "I found out they weren't going to invite you, and it felt so wrong. So I sent you an invitation myself. I wanted you to be there, Liv. I thought maybe they'd change their minds if they saw you." I felt my breath hitch. So, they never wanted me there in the first place. Emma was silent, and that silence was my answer. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. Of course, I should have known. Liv, I'm sorry, Emma whispered. I really thought. Don't. I cut her off. Just don't. A suffocating numbness settled over me as I ended the call. My own family had deliberately cut me out of my sister's wedding, and if Emma hadn't interfered, I wouldn't have even known. I stared blankly at the venue in the distance, the sound of muffled laughter and music floating through the air. They were in there, celebrating, pretending like I didn't exist. I put my car in drive and pulled away, but as I did, a new thought took root in my mind. I needed to find out why. And I wasn't going to stop until I got answers. The road blurred beneath my tires as I drove aimlessly through the city, my mind racing. I couldn't just go home and pretend this didn't happen. I needed answers. Answers my mother refused to give me. Answers my sister was too much of a coward to face me with. And there was only one person left who might have them. My father. I hadn't spoken to him in months. After the divorce, he'd moved across town and built a new life for himself, one that didn't seem to have room for me. But right now, I didn't care about any of that. If he knew something, he was going to tell me. I pulled up in front of his house, my hands shaking as I rang the doorbell. A few seconds later, the door creaked open, and there he stood. Daniel Brooks, the man who used to be my hero. His face tensed with surprise when he saw me. Olivia? His voice carried a cautious edge. We need to talk. He hesitated, then stepped aside. Come in. I walked past him into the living room, the air thick with unspoken words. My father sat down, rubbing his jaw as he studied me. What's going on? He finally asked. I took a deep breath, forcing my emotions down. I was turned away from my own sister's wedding today. Mom refused to tell me why. Emma said I was never supposed to be invited in the first place. I locked eyes with him. And I need to know why. His face darkened. He leaned back, exhaling heavily. I was hoping you'd never find out, he muttered. Find out what? My patience was wearing thin. He hesitated, then stood up and walked to a small cabinet in the corner of the room. From inside, he pulled out a thin, weathered folder. My heart pounded as he handed it to me. Read it, he said quietly. With trembling fingers, I opened it. The first thing I saw was a birth certificate. My birth certificate, but something was wrong. The section for father's name was blank. My stomach dropped. What? What is this? I stammered. My father sighed, his expression filled with something I couldn't quite place. Guilt? Regret? I'm not your biological father, Olivia. The room spun. No, I whispered. That's not possible. I raised you. I loved you like my own. But your mother had an affair before you were born. His voice was quiet, but the words hit like a sledgehammer. Tears burned my eyes as I shook my head. You're lying. I wish I were. I gripped the folder so tightly my knuckles turned white. The edges of the paper crumpled under my fingers. All my life, I had felt like an outsider in my own family. And now, I finally understood why. I wasn't really one of them at all. The silence between us stretched, thick and suffocating. My father, no Daniel, watched me with tired, weary eyes. But I couldn't look at him. I stared at the birth certificate in my hands, my vision blurring. My whole life, I had believed in something that wasn't real. My family. My identity. Everything had been built on a lie. I need to know who he is, I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. Daniel exhaled heavily and ran a hand through his graying hair. Olivia, this won't change anything. I snapped my head up. It already has. My voice cracked. You think I can just go back to my life knowing I've been lied to since birth? He closed his eyes for a moment, as if bracing himself. When he spoke again, his voice was rough. His name was Richard Coleman. Was. Past tense. A chill ran down my spine. Was. Daniel hesitated. He died 20 years ago. I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, anger, grief for a man I never even knew. What happened? Daniel hesitated. He wasn't a good man, Olivia. He stopped himself, shaking his head. He made mistakes. A lot of them. Your mother cut ties with him before you were even born. I swallowed hard. Did Emma know? His jaw tightened. Yes. Of course she did. She had known this entire time, and she still stood by my mother's side, still shut me out of her wedding. I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. I can't be here right now. Daniel reached for my arm, but I pulled away. Olivia, please. I just need some time. I turned and walked out of the house, slamming the door behind me. Back in my car, my hands trembled as I gripped the steering wheel. My mind raced. My mother had betrayed me. My sister had betrayed me. Even the man who raised me had kept the truth from me. I had no one. Except, maybe, I did. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts, my finger hovering over one name. Noah. My best friend. The one person I could always count on. Before I could overthink it, I pressed call. He picked up on the second ring. Liv? You okay? The moment I heard his voice, the dam broke. A sob tore from my throat, and I pressed my hand against my mouth, trying to hold myself together. No, I choked out. Can you come over? I'm already on my way. I closed my eyes, gripping the phone like a lifeline. At least someone still cared. I sat curled up on the couch, staring blankly at the wall. My body felt heavy, as if the weight of the truth had physically settled on my shoulders. The silence in my apartment was deafening until a knock at the door shattered it. I rushed to open it, and there stood Noah, his dark eyes filled with concern, his hair slightly messy as if he had run his hands through it too many times. The moment I saw him, I broke down. Without hesitation, he stepped inside and pulled me into his arms. I clung to him, pressing my face against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Hey, I got you, he murmured, running a soothing hand down my back. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that someone still had me when everything else had fallen apart. After what felt like forever, I finally pulled away, wiping my face. Sorry, Don't apologize, he interrupted. Tell me what happened. I exhaled shakily and sank onto the couch. Noah sat beside me, his full attention on me as I explained everything, finding the birth certificate, the truth about Richard Coleman, my mother's betrayal, and my sister's silence. By the time I finished, my voice was raw. Noah didn't speak right away, and when I looked up, I saw his jaw clenched, his hands curled into fists. They had no right to keep that from you, he said, his voice tight with restrained anger. You deserved to know the truth. I laughed bitterly. Apparently, no one in my family thinks I deserve anything. His expression darkened. They don't get to decide that, but you do. I frowned. What do you mean? You don't have to let them control the narrative anymore, Liv. If they won't give you answers, find them yourself. The idea settled in my mind like a spark waiting to ignite. Find them myself. I had spent my entire life trusting my family to tell me the truth, but they had proven that I couldn't rely on them. Maybe it was time to take matters into my own hands. But where would I even start? Noah must have seen the hesitation on my face because he leaned forward. Look, I can help you. We can find out who Richard Coleman really was. Fear and determination warred inside me. Did I really want to uncover everything? But deep down, I already knew the answer. Yes, I whispered. I want to know. Noah nodded. Then we'll figure it out. Together. For the first time in hours, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in days. The fear and betrayal still sat heavy in my chest, but now there was something else: determination. Noah and I sat at my small dining table, his laptop open between us. He had already started searching for information on Richard Coleman, typing with focused precision. "There's not much on him," Noah muttered, scrolling through pages of results. "Just basic records: birth, death, a couple of business listings. Nothing personal." I exhaled sharply. There has to be something. Maybe an old article, an obituary. Noah's fingers stilled on the keyboard. "Wait, there is an obituary." He clicked on the link, and we both leaned in to read. "Richard Coleman, beloved husband and father, passed away peacefully at the age of 59. He is survived by his wife, Margaret, and daughter, Sophie Coleman." My breath caught. Daughter. What the hell? My voice shook as I pointed at the name. "Sophie Coleman? That's not me. That's not my name." Noah stared at the screen, brows furrowed. "Then who is she?" I shook my head, my mind racing. I had grown up believing I was an only child, no siblings, no extended family beyond my mother and sister. But this obituary suggested otherwise. A cold dread settled in my stomach. I had to find her. Hours later, I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel as I stared at the address I had found. It belonged to Sophie Coleman. I had debated reaching out, but what if she didn't know about me? What if this was just a cruel mistake? Noah, sitting in the passenger seat, nudged my arm. "Are you ready?" I swallowed hard. "No." "Do you want to do this?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." I stepped out of the car, my hands trembling as I walked up to the front door. With a deep breath, I knocked. Seconds passed. Then the door creaked open. A woman stood there, looking to be in her mid-30s, with the same deep brown eyes I saw in the mirror every morning. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. Then she whispered, "Oh my God." She knew. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The woman in front of me, Sophie, looked just as shocked as I felt. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. "You," she started, her voice barely above a whisper. "You look like him." My throat tightened. "Who?" "Our father," she said, stepping back as if to steady herself. "Richard Coleman." The name hit me like a punch to the gut. I had spent my entire life believing one truth, and now standing in front of this stranger, my supposed sister, I realized my whole existence had been built on a lie. I forced myself to speak. I didn't know he had another daughter." She let out a bitter laugh. "And I didn't know I had a sister." Noah shifted beside me, silent but watchful. I was grateful for his presence, grounding me when I felt like I was unraveling. Sophie sighed, rubbing her temples. "You should come inside. We need to talk." I hesitated for only a second before following her in. The living room was cozy, with bookshelves lining the walls and a faint scent of vanilla in the air. I sat on the couch while Sophie paced in front of me, arms crossed. "I don't know where to start," she admitted. "Start with the truth," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. She took a deep breath. "Our father, he was not a good man." A shiver ran down my spine. I had no memories of him, only vague recollections of my mother avoiding questions about him. But hearing it from Sophie made it real. "He had a double life," she continued. "Two families. My mother, Margaret, thought she was his only wife. I guess yours did too." My stomach churned. My mother had always been distant, but had she known? Had she kept this secret from me and my sister all these years? Sophie sighed. "When I was 10, he started disappearing for long periods. My mom thought it was work, but I think now, he was with you." My hands clenched into fists. "Why didn't we ever find out?" "Because he made sure we didn't," she said bitterly. "And when he died, my mother buried the past with him." I swallowed hard, my mind spinning. All this time, I had believed I was alone in the world after my mother's death. But I had a sister who had also been lied to. I need to know everything, I said firmly. Sophie met my gaze, nodding. Then I'll tell you everything I know. Sophie told me everything. Our father, Richard Coleman, had juggled two families for years, expertly hiding the truth. He had spent time with both of us, but never enough for either side to suspect the other. When he died, his secrets were buried with him, until now. I sat there, absorbing it all, my hands trembling. I don't even know what to feel, I admitted. Sophie gave a dry laugh. Yeah, that's how I felt when I first found out. How did you find out? She hesitated before grabbing a folder from a nearby drawer. After my mom passed away, I was going through her things. I found this. She handed me an old worn-out envelope. Inside were letters, some addressed to my mother, some to Sophie's. But they were all from the same man. My father. I scanned them quickly, my heart sinking with every word. Apologies. Promises. Lies. He never planned to tell the truth, I murmured. No, Sophie agreed. And I doubt our mothers wanted us to know either. I looked at her. Did your mother know about us? She hesitated before nodding. I think she found out toward the end, but she never said anything. I exhaled sharply. And mine. She kept it from me until the day she died. Noah, who had been silent all this time, finally spoke. So, what happens now? I looked at Sophie. I don't know. For years, I had searched for a sense of belonging. And now when I had finally found a connection, it felt like a cruel joke. I need time, I admitted. Sophie nodded. Me too. We sat in silence, two strangers bound by blood, trying to make sense of a past neither of us could change. I spent the next few days processing everything. Noah was by my side, patient as always. I don't know what to do with this information, I confessed one night. You don't have to decide right now, he said. Take it one step at a time. And that's what I did. A week later, I met Sophie again. This time we talked about our lives, not just our father. She told me about her childhood, and I shared mine. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. One evening, as I stood in front of my mother's old house, I whispered, "Why didn't you tell me?" I knew she'd never answer, but somehow I felt like I was finally beginning to understand. My life had been built on lies, but now I had the chance to rebuild it with truth. And this time, I wouldn't be alone.